My name is Ashley, and I'm 28 years old. I'm sitting here in what used to be my childhood bedroom, the same room my parents gave to my brother when I was 16, the same room where I used to dream about my future. Now I own this house. And my family has no idea. 3 months ago, I made a decision that changed everything. I bought my family's home. Not to help them, not out of love, but to prove a point that had been brewing inside me for over a decade. You see, when your own parents choose your brother over you repeatedly, when they make you sleep in a cold garage while he gets the master bedroom, something breaks inside you. Something that takes years to rebuild. I remember the exact moment. It started. I was 16, straight A student, working part-time at the local diner to save for college. My brother Jake was 18, had just dropped out of community college for the third time, and was dealing drugs from our basement. But somehow, I was the problem child who needed to be taught a lesson. The lesson? I had to give up my bedroom, so Jake could have more space for his important projects. Those projects turned out to be storing stolen electronics and running a small-time marijuana operation. But my parents didn't know that yet. All they saw was their golden boy who needed support during his difficult transition period. I'll never forget my mom standing in my doorway, her arms crossed, that familiar look of disappointment etched across her face. Ashley, we need to talk about your attitude lately. Your father and I have decided that Jake needs your room. You can set up in the garage. We've already moved a space heater out there. A space heater in Minnesota in February. That's when I realized my parents had made their choice. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was the moment that planted a seed of determination so deep that it would grow for the next 12 years. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. The garage became my sanctuary and my prison. I turned that cold, concrete space into something livable. I hung tapestries to block the draft from the windows. I found an old area rug at a garage sale. I built a makeshift desk from cinder blocks and a piece of plywood. Every night I'd fall asleep to the sound of the furnace clicking on and off, dreaming about the day I'd never have to depend on anyone again. What my parents didn't know was that their decision to exile me to the garage actually saved my life. While Jake was upstairs getting high with his friends, I was in that garage, studying, reading, planning, building a future that didn't require their approval or their love. I graduated valedictorian, got a full scholarship to Northwestern, started my own digital marketing company at 22. By 25, I was making 6 figures. By 27, I had saved enough money to change everything. But this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when you realize that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally never really saw you at all. It's about the moment you stop waiting for an apology that will never come and start writing your own ending. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. My mom's voice was shaky, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Ashley, honey, we need to talk. Your father and I, we're in some trouble, financial trouble. We might lose the house. I sat in my downtown Chicago office looking out at Lake Michigan and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, just emptiness. The house they were about to lose was the same house where they'd chosen my brother over me countless times. The same house where I'd been made to feel invisible, unwanted, like a burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. And now they needed me. To understand what happened next, you need to know about my family. We weren't poor growing up. My dad, Robert, worked as a shift supervisor at the local paper mill. My mom, Linda, was a part-time bookkeeper for a dentist's office. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Duluth, Minnesota. Middle class, stable, normal on the outside. But inside that house was a hierarchy that made no sense to anyone except my parents. Jake was the crown prince who could do no wrong. I was the responsible one who was supposed to understand why I always came second. Jake was 2 years older than me, but you'd think he was the baby of the family based on how my parents treated him. When he got arrested for shoplifting at 15, my parents blamed his bad influences. When I got caught reading in the living room past my bedtime, I was grounded for a week for being disobedient and disrespectful. When Jake crashed my dad's truck into a mailbox while driving drunk at 17, my parents paid for the damage and told the neighbors it was a mechanical failure. When I accidentally broke a coffee mug while doing dishes, I had to pay for a replacement out of my babysitting money. The pattern was so consistent that I started keeping a journal. Not because I was dramatic, but because I needed proof that I wasn't crazy. That the favoritism was real. That notebook became my evidence that love in my family was conditional, and I wasn't meeting the conditions. My mom always had an excuse ready. Jake needs more support because he's struggling. You're so capable, Ashley. You don't need as much attention. Jake is sensitive and you're stronger. What she never said was the truth. They simply loved him more, and no amount of achievement or good behavior on my part was going to change that. My dad was quieter about it, but just as complicit. He'd ruffle Jake's hair when he walked by and barely acknowledge me. He'd spend hours helping Jake fix his motorcycle, but was too busy to help me with my science fair project. When I won the state championship for debate team, he missed the ceremony because Jake had a hangover and needed someone to drive him to work. The garage situation was just the most obvious example of how little I mattered to them. Jake needed space for his art projects. Never mind that his art projects were poorly drawn graffiti tags and elaborate plans for drug deals. Never mind that I was on the honor roll and had never given them a moment of trouble. They converted my bedroom into Jake's personal paradise. New furniture, a flat-screen TV, a mini fridge. They even installed better lighting and painted the walls his favorite color. Meanwhile, I got a space heater and a firm reminder that I should be grateful they weren't charging me rent. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like you could disappear and no one would notice for days? That's what those 2 years felt like. I'd come home from school, from work, from debate practice, and head straight to my garage exile. They'd have family dinners without me. They'd watch movies without me. They'd plan weekend trips and forget to invite me. The breaking point came during my senior year. I had been accepted to Northwestern with a full academic scholarship. This was huge, life-changing. The kind of news that should have made my parents proud beyond measure. I remember walking into the kitchen, acceptance letter in my hand, practically vibrating with excitement. My mom glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice, honey. Did you remember to take out the trash?" My dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "College is expensive, Ashley. Hope you've thought about how you're going to pay for it." I stood there, holding proof that I wouldn't cost them a dime for my education, and they couldn't even pretend to be happy for me. That's when Jake stumbled downstairs, hungover from another party, and asked for $20 for gas. My dad immediately reached for his wallet. That night I made myself a promise in that cold garage. I would succeed not because of my family, but in spite of them. I would build a life so good, so stable, so impressive that their approval would become irrelevant. I would become the kind of person who didn't need anything from them ever again. College was my escape, but it was also my proving ground. I studied business and marketing, worked 3 part-time jobs, and graduated summa cum laude. I started freelancing while I was still in school, building websites for small businesses and managing social media accounts. By the time I graduated, I already had a client base and a plan. Chicago became my home base. Far enough from Duluth that surprise visits weren't possible. Close enough that I couldn't be accused of abandoning the family entirely. I rented a studio apartment, then a one-bedroom, then a two-bedroom condo overlooking the lake. Each upgrade felt like vindication. Meanwhile, Jake was still living at home, still getting arrested occasionally, still draining my parents' savings with his schemes and failures. He'd had 17 different jobs in 5 years, been evicted from 3 apartments, and had 2 DUIs, but he was still their precious son who just needed more time to figure things out. I visited home twice a year, Christmas and my mom's birthday. Short visits, polite conversations. I'd bring expensive gifts and expensive wine, hoping to buy their attention, if not their love. It never worked. Jake would show up with a handmade card and get twice the enthusiasm. The distance helped, but it didn't heal the wound. Nothing could heal the wound of knowing your own parents preferred your screw-up brother to their high-achieving daughter. Nothing could undo the message they'd sent me over and over again. You are not enough, and you never will be. But distance gave me perspective, and perspective gave me power. The call about their financial troubles shouldn't have surprised me. I'd been watching their situation deteriorate from afar for years. My dad's job at the paper mill had been eliminated 3 years earlier when the company downsized. He'd been working part-time at a hardware store ever since, making a fraction of his previous salary. My mom had increased her hours at the dentist's office, but it wasn't enough to cover their mortgage payments and Jake's endless financial emergencies. Because yes, Jake was still draining their resources at 28 years old, still living at home, still bouncing from job to job. His latest venture was a cryptocurrency consulting business that consisted of him losing other people's money on risky investments. My parents had refinanced their house twice to bail him out of various debts and legal troubles. When my mom called that March morning, her voice cracking with desperation, I felt a mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to cry for the scared little girl I used to be, the one who would have done anything to earn their love. We need $40,000, Ashley. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We've tried everything else. Jake says he has some deals coming through, but they need more time to develop. Jake's deals. Always Jake's deals. I wondered if my mom actually believed he was going to save them, or if she was just so invested in the lie that she couldn't see the truth anymore. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't tell her that I'd been thinking about it for years. Not about giving them money, but about something else entirely. Something that had been percolating in my mind since the day they chose Jake's comfort over my basic dignity. That afternoon, I called my real estate agent in Duluth. Sarah Martinez had helped me buy my condo in Chicago, and she had connections throughout Minnesota. I'd stayed in touch with her over the years, partly for business networking and partly because she was one of the few people who knew my whole story. Sarah, I need you to look into a property for me. It's my childhood home. I think it might be going into foreclosure soon, and I want to know everything about the situation. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Ashley, are you sure about this? Buying your family's house? That's complicated territory. I stared out my office window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about 16-year-old me shivering in a garage while my brother enjoyed my bedroom. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The research took 2 weeks. The news was worse than I'd expected. My parents were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. They owed $67,000 in back payments and penalties. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. They had 30 days to bring the account current or lose the house. But here's what made it interesting. The house was worth $180,000. The remaining mortgage balance was only $95,000. If someone were to buy it at the foreclosure auction, they could get it for significantly less than market value. Someone like me. I had $250,000 in savings and investments. I could buy that house with cash and still have money left over. The question wasn't whether I could afford it. The question was whether I was ready to own the place where I'd learned that love was conditional and I didn't meet the conditions. I called my lawyer, David Chen, who'd helped me incorporate my business and had become a trusted advisor over the years. David was practical, ethical, and had no patience for emotional decisions that could backfire legally or financially. You want to buy your parents' house at a foreclosure auction without telling them you're the buyer? David's tone was carefully neutral, which meant he thought I was losing my mind. Walk me through your endgame here, Ashley. I'd been thinking about the endgame for weeks. I want them to understand what it feels like to depend on someone else's generosity. I want them to experience the vulnerability of not knowing whether the person with power over their living situation actually cares about their well-being. David was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like revenge. That sounds like education. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. I would attend the foreclosure auction using an LLC I'd create for the purpose. The house would likely go for around $120,000, given the market and the condition of the property. I'd buy it, then approach my parents as their new landlord. I wasn't going to kick them out immediately. I wasn't going to be cruel. I was going to offer them a lease at below market rent with one condition. They had to treat me with the same respect they'd always shown Jake. They had to include me in family decisions. They had to acknowledge my presence and my worth. If they could do that, they could stay in their home. If they couldn't, they could figure out alternative housing arrangements. Tell me in the comments, have you ever wanted to teach someone a lesson about how they treated you? How far would you go to make your point? The auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April. I drove up from Chicago the night before and stayed at a hotel downtown. I hadn't been back to Duluth since Christmas, and the familiar streets felt like visiting a museum of my own pain. I drove past my high school, where I'd spent 4 years working twice as hard as everyone else for half the recognition. I drove past the diner where I'd worked weekends and summers, saving money that my parents assumed I was spending on clothes and movies like other teenagers. I drove past the library where I'd spent countless hours studying for the SATs and researching colleges, dreaming of a life beyond the boundaries of my family's expectations. Finally, I drove past the house. Their house. Soon to be my house. It looked smaller than I remembered, more run down. The paint was peeling around the windows. The front lawn was patchy and overgrown. The garage where I'd spent 2 years of my life was still there, looking as unwelcoming as ever. Jake's motorcycle was in the driveway, which meant he was still living there, still dependent on our parents even as they faced homelessness. I wondered if he had any idea what his lifestyle had cost them. I wondered if he would care if he knew. That night, I called Sarah to confirm the final details. The auction would start at 10 a.m. She'd researched the other potential buyers and didn't think there would be much competition. Most investors weren't interested in a property that came with sitting tenants, especially tenants facing financial difficulties. Are you going to tell them it's you bidding? Sarah asked. Not until after I own it. And then? And then we'll see what kind of people they really are. The auction took place on the courthouse steps on a cold April morning. I stood among a small group of investors and curious onlookers, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over my face. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I genuinely didn't want to be recognized by anyone who might know, my family. The auctioneer was a thin man in his 50s who clearly did this routine dozens of times a month. He rattled off the property details in a monotone voice. 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom single-family home, 1,847 square feet, built in 1987. Opening bid is $75,000. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. This was it. The moment that would change everything between my family and me. The moment I would own the place where they'd taught me I wasn't worth loving. Bidding started slow. An investor in a suit bid $75,000. Another man in work clothes bid $80,000. A woman with a clipboard bid $85,000. I waited, letting them establish the pace, trying to look casual and disinterested. The bidding stalled at $95,000. The auctioneer called for additional bids once, twice. I raised my hand. $100,000 from the lady in the cap. The other bidders looked around, sizing up this new competition. The investor in the suit shook his head and walked away. The man in work clothes bid $105,000. The woman with the clipboard dropped out. It came down to me and the man in work clothes. We went back and forth. 110, 115, 120. At $125,000, he shook his head and stepped back. Sold to bidder number 47 for $125,000. I owned my childhood home, the E. Paperwork took 2 hours. I signed documents, wrote a check, and received the keys to a house I knew better than any place on earth. Sarah met me outside the courthouse with a bottle of champagne and a concerned expression. "How do you feel?" she asked as we sat in her car. I looked at the keys in my hand. Heavy, ordinary house keys that represented 12 years of planning and saving and dreaming of this moment. I feel like I need to go home and face my family. The drive to the house took 10 minutes but felt like an hour. I parked across the street and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage. Through the front window, I could see my mom moving around the kitchen. My dad's truck was in the driveway next to Jake's motorcycle. The whole family was home. I knocked on the front door of my own house. My mom opened it, and her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, hope, and finally suspicion. "Ashley, what are you doing here? Did you drive up to help us?" "Pack? Actually, Mom, I drove up to talk to you about your housing situation. Can I come in?" She stepped aside, and I walked into the living room where I'd spent thousands of hours feeling invisible. My dad was in his recliner, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. Jake was sprawled on the couch in pajama pants and a stained t-shirt, playing video games on his phone. "Ashley!" My dad struggled to get up from his chair. "Honey, this is such a surprise. Your mom said you might be able to help us with some money for the house." I sat down on the edge of the coffee table, facing all three of them. This was the moment I'd been planning for months, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. "I need to tell you something. The house was auctioned this morning." My mom's face went white. "Oh God, it's really over. We lost it." "You didn't lose it to the bank, Mom. You lost it to me. I bought it." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. My dad's mouth fell open. Jake actually looked up from his phone. My mom stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "What do you mean you bought it?" My dad's voice was barely a whisper. "I mean, I went to the courthouse this morning, participated in the foreclosure auction, and purchased this house for $125,000. I own it now. You're sitting in my living room." Jake laughed, the kind of nervous laugh people make when they don't understand what's happening. "That's crazy, Ashley. Why would you do that?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. The question that would let me say everything I'd been holding inside for 12 years. "Do you remember when I was 16 and you decided Jake needed my bedroom? Do you remember making me sleep in the garage for 2 years while he got the master bedroom and a flat-screen TV and a mini fridge?" My mom's hands were shaking. That was different. That was just temporary, and Jake was going through a difficult time. It wasn't temporary, Mom. It was 2 years. 2 years of sleeping in a cold garage while my brother lived like a king in my room. 2 years of being treated like I was less important than your precious son who was dealing drugs out of our basement. We didn't know about the drugs. Dad said quietly. But you did know about everything else. You knew Jake had dropped out of school. You knew he was getting arrested. You knew he was stealing from your wallet and crashing your vehicles and bringing dangerous people to our house. And you still chose him over me. Every single time. I could feel 12 years of hurt and anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I'd practiced this speech in my head 1,000 times. I got straight A's, worked part-time jobs, won academic awards, got a full scholarship to Northwestern. And you acted like I was a burden you couldn't wait to get rid of. Do you know how that felt? Do you know what it does to a child when their own parents make it clear that love is conditional and they're not meeting the conditions? My mom was crying now, but not the kind of crying that comes from understanding. The kind that comes from being cornered and not knowing how to escape. We always loved you, Ashley. You were just so independent. You didn't seem to need as much support. I was independent because I had to be. Because you taught me that needing support was a weakness and that asking for love was pointless because Jake would always come first. Like and subscribe if this story is resonating with you. Share in the comments if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your family. Jake finally spoke up, his voice defensive and confused. So what? You bought the house to kick us out? That's pretty messed up, Ashley. I looked at my brother, this 30-year-old man who'd never had to face consequences for anything, who'd never had to sleep in a garage or work for approval, or wonder if his family actually loved him. He looked genuinely bewildered by the idea that actions might have consequences. I bought this house because I wanted you all to understand what it feels like to depend on someone else's generosity. I wanted you to know what it's like when someone else has power over your housing situation and you're not sure if they actually care about your well-being. My dad was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Ashley, we know. We made mistakes. We know we could have done better. But this seems like revenge. This isn't revenge, Dad. This is education. And here's what you're going to learn. You can stay here, I continued, watching their faces shift from fear to confusion to cautious hope. I'm not going to make you homeless. But there are conditions. I pulled a folded document from my purse. I'd had David draw up a lease agreement that was fair but firm. First, you'll pay rent. Below market rent, but rent nonetheless. $700 a month, which is about half what you'd pay anywhere else in the area. Second, Jake has 60 days to find his own place. This house has 3 bedrooms, and one of them is going to be mine when I visit. Third, family decisions get discussed with me. No more major choices made without including the daughter who now owns your home. My mom was reading over the lease with shaking hands. Ashley, we can't afford $700 a month. Your father's only working part-time, and my income barely covers our other expenses. Then Jake needs to contribute. He's 30 years old and has been living here rent-free for a decade. Time for him to start pulling his weight. Jake's face was red with indignation. I can't just move out in 60 days. I don't have money saved up for deposits and first month's rent. This is ridiculous. This was the moment I'd been waiting. Or the moment when Jake would finally understand what it felt like to have his security threatened, to have someone else's timeline imposed on his living situation. Jake, I lived in a garage for 2 years when I was 16 because you needed more space. You're 30. You can figure out alternative housing arrangements in 60 days. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Take your time reading. The lease. You have 48 hours to decide whether you want to sign it. If you don't, I'll begin eviction proceedings, and you'll have 30 days to vacate. I walked toward the front door of my house, then turned back one more time. For what it's worth, I hope you stay. I hope we can build a better relationship now that we're all clear about where we stand. But that's up to you. The drive back to Chicago was surreal. I owned my childhood home. I'd confronted my family with 12 years of accumulated hurt and anger. I'd offered them a path forward that required them to treat me with respect. Now I had to wait and see what kind of people they really were. They signed the lease. Jake moved out in 58 days, 2 days before his deadline. He found a studio apartment across town and got a job at a call center. For the first time in his adult life, he was paying his own rent and buying his own groceries. My parents started including me in family discussions. They called before making major purchases or decisions. They asked about my life in Chicago, my business, my relationships. It felt awkward at first, like we were all learning a new language. But something unexpected started happening. Without the constant drain of Jake's financial emergencies and emotional manipulation, my parents began to seem like different people. My mom started taking evening classes at the community college. My dad found a full-time job at a different company. They began talking about plans and dreams instead of just crisis management. The first time my mom called to ask for advice instead of money, I cried for an hour after I hung up the phone. 1 year later, I'm sitting in what used to be my childhood bedroom, writing this story. It's been completely redecorated since Jake moved out. Gone are the expensive furniture and flat-screen TV my parents bought him. In their place are simple, clean furnishings and family photos that actually include me for once. I visit once a month now instead of twice a year. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The conversations are real now. We talk about books and politics and funny stories from our days. We talk about the past sometimes too, with more honesty than we ever managed when I was growing up. My dad apologized 6 months ago. A real apology, not the kind where someone says they're sorry you feel bad. He said he was sorry for making me feel invisible, for choosing Jake over me repeatedly, for not seeing how much damage they were doing to our relationship. My mom's apology came later and was harder won. She'd invested so much of her identity in being Jake's protector that admitting she'd failed me required her to rebuild her understanding of herself as a mother. But when it came, it was genuine and specific and healing. Jake and I have a complicated relationship now. He resents that I forced him to grow up, but he also seems healthier than he's been in years. Having to support himself has given him confidence and purpose he never had when everything was handed to him. He's been clean and sober for 8 months. He has a steady job and a steady girlfriend. We're not close, but we're civil, which is more than I expected. The house itself has become something I never expected it to be. A home. Not because it's mine now, but because the relationships inside it are healthier. The garage is still there, but it's been converted into a proper guest room with insulation and real furniture. Sometimes I sleep there when I visit, not because I have to, but because it reminds me how far I've come. I've learned something important this year. Revenge doesn't heal you, but boundaries can. Taking control of the situation didn't magically fix all the hurt I'd carried around for 12 years, but it did create space for something new to grow. My business is thriving. I'm seeing someone wonderful who knows my whole story and loves me anyway. I'm considering moving back to Minnesota, not to be closer to my family, but because Chicago has given me everything I needed, and now I'm ready for the next chapter. The question people always ask me is whether I regret buying the house, whether I think I went too far. whether I feel guilty for putting my family through the fear and uncertainty of potentially losing their home. Here's what I know. I spent 16 years being afraid that if I didn't earn their love perfectly enough, I would lose it. I spent 12 years being angry that love in my family was conditional, and I wasn't meeting the conditions. Buying the house taught all of us that love doesn't have to be conditional, but respect does. And sometimes the people who claim to love you need to learn the difference. I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret demanding the respect I should have been given all along. I don't regret using my success to create consequences for people who had never faced any. But I also don't regret offering them a path back into my life. Because despite everything, they are my family. And families can heal if everyone is willing to do the work. If you're watching this and you've been the forgotten child, the scapegoat, the one who always comes second in your family, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be seen and heard and valued for who you are. You deserve unconditional love, but you also deserve conditional respect. You don't have to buy your family's house to make your point, but you do have to decide what kind of treatment you're willing to accept and what boundaries you're willing to enforce. You have to decide whether you're going to keep waiting for people to change on their own or whether you're going to create conditions that make change necessary. Drop a comment below and let me know. What boundaries have you had to set with family members who didn't respect you? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? And if you're still working on it, what's holding you back? This story has been about family and money and houses, but really it's been about worth. About learning to see your own value even when the people closest to you don't. About refusing to accept scraps of love from people who should be giving you the whole meal. It's been about understanding that you can't control whether people love you, but you can control whether you allow them to treat you badly. And sometimes, changing the conditions of the relationship is the only way to save it. Hit like if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and what happens when you finally decide you're worth fighting for. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos about setting boundaries, healing family relationships, and building the life you actually deserve. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that. They're worth more than they're being given. Leave a comment with your own story, or just to let me know you're listening. This community is built on people who understand that family love should be unconditional, but family respect has to be earned by everyone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe in growth and healing and second chances. And thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone in having had to learn these lessons the hard way. Until next time, remember, you can't control how people treat you, but you can control how long you allow it to continue. And sometimes, the biggest gift you can give someone is consequences for their actions and a chance to do better. Take care of yourselves. You're worth it.